bringing you a unique perspective on alien abductions with a special guest today here on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias, welcome to the show. Whether your interest is Atlantis, Zeus, or anything in between, we tackle it all with logic and reason from our quantumly entangled castle tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangaean mountain range. We are the one-stop shop for myth, history, and mystery, decoding it all through the lens that the spiritual is the geometric fourth dimension. We do have some additional trigger warnings for this episode. Reproductive topics were mentioned, abductions were mentioned, so if anything along the lines of what you classically hear about alien abductions is triggering to you, you will definitely want to proceed with caution. This is definitely not an episode for little ears. You have been warned. Listener discretion is advised. Aside from that, the only other trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation, as always. So if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you'll want to turn off the podcast now. And over to our resident psychologist in training, psychologist Padawan Madison, to give us a psych fact that is somewhat relevant to the episode that we are about to dive into.
Yes, so dissociation is often a defense mechanism used to cope with trauma. And it's especially relevant with like childhood.
Yeah.
So when a person experiences intense stress or trauma, their mind may disconnect from the present moment to avoid the pain associated with it.
Yeah. And it's a way to kind of survive, especially when you don't have the skills and coping mechanisms present to integrate a traumatic and emotionally charged experience from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
Yeah. I will also address the elephant in the room, or as it is today, the Isaiah that's in the room, not the book of Isaiah, because I always have that since I have a Bible here, but we have the literal, physical, quantumly transcending time, not astral projecting Isaiah, but yeah, how's it going, Isaiah?
Good. Happy to be here.
So we've actually already done this interview, but we're coming back here after the end. Just kind of wanted to see how it all went to make sure we got the trigger warnings right. But I thought...
You didn't mention blood, but we definitely had a pretty lengthy discussion on that, in case.
That's actually a common one with alien abductions as well. That's kind of why I threw out that blanket statement.
Yeah.
So I will say... this is a little bit more of a fringe discussion than we do typically. We have tended to have this in the past on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. But for those of you that are just tuning into our Mesopotamian myth breakdowns, you're like, alien abductions, what are they doing? But we want to have people with diverse experiences and diverse views onto the show. And so, back from episode 20s, we did our Mothman excursions, and we had Linda Sigmund, did a in-field interview on that. So this does align with the M-Quad direction, and I think these are pertinent conversations to have when we're looking at Mesopotamian myth, thanks to people like Zechariah Sitchin, Billy Carson putting forward the ancient aliens agenda. Mm-hmm. That, we do study these mythological texts, and there does seem to be something more happening, and I see this as a way to unravel that mystery to get us there. So if you're like, oh, alien abductions just isn't for me, hey, no harm, no foul if you want to sit out for this episode, but, I think this is something that aligns with those seekers of truth out there that are part of the M-Quad force. Something else, too, I will say is that it tied into some Skinwalker Ranch stuff. So we had on episode 24, I did some analysis and discussion of Skinwalker Ranch and some of the phenomenon they experienced about cattle mutilations and the cattle missing like blood and everything, and it would happen very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Those discussions as well tie in. And I mean, even if you want to approach this from a skeptical lens, which I think you should, because anyone can make up anything, that any experience. So you should always kind of have that vague skepticism in your mind. I think it's impossible to deny that something is happening in our world that we can't quite explain, between the missing 411 with Dave Paulides, and then Skinwalker Ranch, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and there's a lot of biases there. Go listen to episode 24 if you want to hear that. There's a lot of different things out there where I think it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, again, to call back on that old phrase, if you don't want to listen to these conversations about things, to at least even just vaguely entertain the idea that it could be true.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that you both wanted to add before we jump into the actual episode here for the listeners?
It was just a really interesting interview overall. And, I think everyone can get something out of it.
I agree.
So,
Isaiah?
I'm sure you'll hear something new.
yes.
There you go. All right. Stay tuned, Mystery Seekers. This episode is for you. All right, so today we have the author of Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest, Karin Wilkinson. I'll put the link to the book in the show notes. I highly recommend, if you're into these kind of more fringe topics of UFO abductions and trying to get to the bottom of it and the more paranormal ideas, I highly recommend the book. It was a great read, very easy read, and a lot of what she presents definitely aligns with the M-Quad direction. So for our listeners out there, definitely would encourage you to get that. But Karin, she's a writer, contributor to L.A. Marzulli's monthly newsletters. She's involved in some of the prophecy and the supernatural discussions that they have on that platform. Wife, mother, and grandmother, and experience in the software industry. So that being said, I will open up the floor here. Karin, can you hear me?
I can. Hi. Thank you so much for having me on, Josiah and Madison and Isaiah. I'm just so...
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. We've teased it a little bit on this show, but I didn't want to name drop in case there were any last minute complications and leave some false promises for the listeners. But you're here, and I'm very excited to have this conversation. So not everyone's read your book, of course, and I highly encourage people to go read the book. But for our listeners out there that aren't familiar with your story, if you could just give us a short recap of, just kind of your life story and like what everything you kind of go over in the book in a nutshell.
Sure. I'm just honored to be here with you guys today. So I'm Karin Wilkinson, and the book is Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest, and it is an accounting of my life experience and the things that happened to me throughout my life, and how God played a pivotal role in rescuing me and taking me out of some of the darkness and the dark things in this world. While parts of the book are a bit disturbing and troubling for some people to read, there are really positive and amazing experiences that I recount in the book as well, because I want people to know, God's kingdom is wonderful and beautiful, and there may be some pretty dark things out there in this world, but there are also so many wonderful things, and God can really deliver you from anything. And I'm not, the book doesn't push my belief systems down anyone's throat. It is very open to just helping people understand what's really going on out there, who and what these things are that people call aliens, and the reality of it, and where it exists from a biblical viewpoint and from a world viewpoint, and just trying to get that truth across and out to the world. And I'm just very honored that God gave me a platform to be able to share this in a way that, unlike a lot of other books on the subject, I can approach it from a point of view of where does this exist in other literature and other religious texts in other cultures, and how does it relate to our lives and our world today.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because the more, we've been coming out of Mesopotamian mythology here, and, the more we study all this, there seems to be that there is something else broader going on. And so, having you on to talk about, being abducted and having experiences with other entities, it might be hard for some listeners to believe, but I think it's an important conversation to have, and you have to consider that, what if, and to examine the evidence. And one thing I've seen too is a lot of everyone like likes to point the finger at like people that have been abducted and be like, oh, you just want to come forward for fame and this and that. But oftentimes the people that come forward get ridiculed and have a lot of negative experiences, and it usually doesn't result in like the fame that everybody tends to think and to dismiss these stories. So I was wanting to ask, like, what was your experience coming forward with your story? Because I'm sure it has not been all positive.
No, that's a really great question, because there is so much stigma around non-human alien entities, around aliens, around alien abduction. And while we have so much proof, and even our congressional hearings on the subject, and everyone coming forward and admitting to, we have the crash craft, we have the bodies, we have all of these things, people still don't want to allow that into their very limited paradigm of belief systems. So the stigma is still very much there. And in fact, speaking of stigma, I wrote an article this month in LA's newsletter about stigma. And, as psychologists, having psychology background, you and your wife, you understand for a lot more than most people do about stigma. And I wanted to explain to people how there are like 7 different types of stigma, and how that affects people and affects you throughout your life, and how, people will just accept the stigma that's put out there about something, and the stigma relates to a negative thoughts, or it's like a prejudice. It's a really terrible thing. And one thing I noticed, even in the congressional hearings, all of these whistleblowers said, we need to address the stigma. We need to address the stigma. And it's true, we do, because until we do that, it's very hard to get past this wall that people have built up, and they refuse to look past it. Because when you say, I was abducted by aliens, people look at you like you're crazy, because that's what was created. That is a paradigm that was created for everyone a long time ago, to try to squash this information and keep it out of the public eye, to keep it out of our purview. So, and excuse my voice, y'all. It's allergy season here in Texas, so I'm losing my voice. But so it's been a difficult road. Without God's love and support, I would not have been able to do this. I never ever expected to share this information. I never expected to come forward with this. It's a very difficult subject to speak about. But it was God's path for me, and certainly something I didn't expect. You don't do this for fame or fortune. No, that is not what happens. Writing a book is not a moneymaker. I can guarantee that. And this is just a ministry, and it's a way for me to reach people and to help people. And the best part of this is that I get to meet people and talk with people and help people. And even if I reach 2 or 3 people, then it's been all worth it. But there's hundreds and hundreds of people who reach out to me, or who I meet in person. I get to counsel and talk with and help with. And I'm not saying I'm a professional counselor, please, I'm not that at all. But just to have these things in common, and to have someone help explain to them what happened, why, how you can stop these things, and how your faith and your belief systems play a big role in that. And so it's been just such an amazing journey. Certainly, yes, it's not something you do for fame or fortune. I've had a lot of negative thrown at me in the course of this, but the positive far outweighs that. So it's just really been worth it.
That's awesome. And no, I can definitely second you on the writing a book doesn't make a lot of money. I did a fiction novel when I was coming out of college, and I think I'm still several $100s in the hole from authoring that one. It's an investment, and oftentimes you don't get your money back. So, but no, I'll say one more thing here, and then I'll kick it over to both Madison and Isaiah to ask some questions here. But when I was reading your book, one thing that really jumped out to me, because in psychology, I had focused in on a lot of trauma and like PTSD, complex PTSD, dissociative identity disorder. That area was really interesting and intriguing to me. And as I was reading your book, I kind of saw that sprinkled across your story where you didn't put a name to it. And that's kind of where it stood out more to me, where it's like, she's probably not faking this, because you'd have to have so much psychology knowledge to kind of weave this into the story. And so, each listener is going to come at it with their own perspective. Some are going to be more skeptical than others. That's perfectly fine. We're here just to talk about the story. But that was one thing that I really resonated with, to be like, hey, like the fact that she's creating like a little Karen to disconnect from the trauma and to kind of protect herself. This is a core component of dissociative identity disorder, or at least complex trauma, to kind of protect that innocent child part of yourself. And so that was something that really resonated with me, where it's like, okay, you know, that this seems to have some validity and some credence backing to it, other than just someone making, you know, some bold claim. But yeah, so I'll
Well,
go
thank
ahead.
you for saying that. And if I can jump in on that, I appreciate that, because you know that it is a difficult thing, and it's a difficult thing to talk about. And those of us who've gone through it have had to find ways to deal with that. And I'm not trying to convince anyone. No one has to believe me. That's not why I'm here. But, and you don't have to believe me, but there are just thousands upon thousands, hundreds and thousands of people who've gone through the same thing. And now they're talking about it in the hallowed halls of Congress. So there's just too much proof out there for people not to look at it. And if I didn't think it was such an important issue, I wouldn't be doing this, you know, because it is difficult to share with people, because most people don't want to believe it.
No, I agree with you there. So that being said, I'll kick it over to, I suppose, Madison next, and you can ask the next question. We'll just kind of bounce around back and forth.
Okay, so I found something really interesting in the book, and it actually made me really excited. But I'm more of the science nerd. So you had mentioned in passing that you were type O negative,
Yes.
and you thought that would be a genetic commodity.
Yes.
And then in another part of the book, are you okay if I quote it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Please.
You said, I believe that this skin can be refreshed and fed by using the blood and tissue collected by aliens through the mutilation of animals and the kidnapping of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so interesting because type O negative blood, it doesn't have A, B, or the Rh antigens. So when you use this blood, it is the universal donor, so you have less of a risk of any adverse reactions or anything. And there were actually some studies done, actually recently. It's called young blood transfusion or parabiosis. I think I said that right.
Yeah, I'll have the links to the studies in the show notes for our listeners as well.
But this is when the blood, or specifically the plasma, is transfused from a younger person to an older person. And this is actually becoming really popular with like celebrities, billionaires, stuff like that right now. And they did a study on mice, and they found that when you transfuse blood from younger mice to older mice, there were rejuvenating effects on the organs, muscles, and stem cells. So, yeah, there's definitely some validity with that.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing about that too is, you know, with cattle blood can be used for humans.
Mm-hmm.
The same way cattle milk is used for humans. So that's such a, you know, a close genetic match there, and that it's compatible. And most people don't know that's why these cattle are found drained of blood. And there were so many instances when I was taken where I was witnessing giant pools of what looked like blood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't forget that smell. That pennies, you know, or like I couldn't stand pennies growing up, because little kids would put pennies in their mouths. And it would just make me want to throw up, because I was around that kind of a smell, that kind of copper. And then finally one day I put that together, why that bothered me so much. You know, and it's those little things like that those exposure things throughout your life that kind of come together. But that's really interesting. I will look up that young blood transfusion, because I really did feel like that's what they were using it for, and other things as well. But yes.
Yeah, and then there's also like suggestions for the future for actually psychology. So I want to dig into that more, where there's potential blood-based therapies. So I don't know much on that, but I saw that was a possibility for the future.
We'll have to do a future episode diving into that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, we could do so much on the blood, because, and everything, what I've noticed in my research and writing since the book and things, and I'm working on my next book, everything always goes back to the blood. Everything goes back to the blood. And they are fascinated with our blood and how it works and how it connects and how can they integrate that. And that's why they use it, because they're not the same. Their blood is not the same. Their tissue is not the same. And I really think and I write about this a little bit in the book, and I'll expand on it in the next one, because in the first book I tried to be very high level for people. It was a lot to introduce, so I didn't want to go too deep into too many areas. But, I really think after the flood of Noah, God changed a lot of things about us physically and chemically to create a greater separation between us and the angelic beings, because we know from Genesis 6 that, and I know you've spoken a lot about Genesis in your podcast, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men beautiful and made of them wise while they choose, plural. And after the flood, that changed. And I really think that along with changing our weather and our atmosphere and other things like that, he also changed our makeup a bit. And you'll hear on these old alien shows, I'm going to try to put that in a better way so I'm not advertising it, they'll talk about how, there seems to have been a genetic change in humans and we think they did it. Well, now, I really think God made changes to protect us along the way. And they've been spending all this time since then trying to figure out how to deal with those genetic changes that God made that separates us further. And that's another reason I think that they made the grays the way that they did. In the book, I talk about them being, and I don't want to go too far down a rabbit trail because I know you probably have questions about this, and I'm probably raising more questions than giving answers, but they were created as like a meat suit for the purpose of being in our atmosphere. And that is, because they can't be around us the way they could before and in our atmosphere and interact with us the way they could in the days of Noah. And when you read General Corso's, the book, The Day After Roswell, he backs up so much of what I wrote about. It's funny because I didn't read it until just recently. I'm like, I got to include some of this in the next book, because his firsthand experience backs up so much of what I've written extensively about the Greys, and I've continued to write about for L.A. Marzulli in his monthly newsletter as well.
No, that's awesome. I think, Isaiah, you had some questions about like the meat suits or something you were wanting to ask. That's perfect to just keep going down this rabbit hole instead. Sometimes we have tangential episodes. This is just going to be one.
Yeah. So I guess it sounds like there's sort of a physical body that these maybe more spiritual beings are able to inhabit and control.
Yeah.
If that's the case, do those meat suits or those little gray aliens, do those bodies always stay on Earth? Is there a place where they would be kept?
That's a great question. No, they do not. The bodies that they created, so there are different types of alien entities that people are familiar with. And the ones that would come to get me, and that other people have spoken about as well, and that are most commonly seen, are referred to as gray aliens. And they're the shorter, and I'll just explain this for your listeners. The shorter grays, they have big bulbous heads and big black eyes that look like a screen. These eyes do not seem to move at all. They have what looks like a mouth that doesn't open. They don't have any discernible male or female body parts. They're very thin. Their necks are extremely thin. Their arms are very long and thin, and legs. And their bodies just seem to be almost as if it's just not to house normal organs. And I believe they've created these for coming in and out of our atmosphere and for traveling across different dimensions and across space and time and the different things that they have to do. It saves them. If you think about it, and I believe that these bodies are created to house either demonic entities, which my belief is that demons are the disembodied spirits of the deceased Nephilim. Nephilim, as I believe your audience knows, are the progeny of humans and angelic beings, specifically fallen, or angels who sinned. And then I believe they could also house AI, or they could even house another entity, a smaller entity, if they wanted. They're created, and I'll write more about this in the second book, of the way that the ones that have been reported through books like General Corso's The Day After Roswell really explains how they're designed to travel and withstand different pressures and things like that. But so that's what I believe that they were created to do. And that's why I wrote about it, because some of them didn't smell very good, almost as if they were rotting. And some of them didn't seem to have any smell at all. And then when I was taken, I would see other grays that looked similar to these. These little grays were cookie cutter. They all looked the same. They didn't speak, but they did mind speak. They didn't have any expression on their face. I felt evil coming off of them, but they didn't do anything to me except take me. They had the ability to put me in a paralysis state, things like that, but they didn't physically have the ability to attack me or hurt me in other ways. When I would be taken, there would be other grays that were not cookie cutter. They were all different. Some were taller, some were shorter, some were heavier, some looked more feminine, some looked more masculine. Their eyes actually moved. They had eyes that had different features to them, not just the black screen. They had faces that had expression, that their faces actually moved and had expression, where these little grays, they were just stoic. They did not change. They didn't have expressions. And they clearly had personalities, because when they would, the ones that were all different, when they would speak, mind speak as well. They made noises, but they weren't vocabulary like we have. When they would communicate with me, you could feel anger, or you could feel calm, you could feel whatever they were trying to portray. With the little grays, it was always almost monotone. So there's such a difference. And immediately, even from a very young age, I realized these things were like a little robot or something. I wasn't sure what they were, but I knew that they were almost not real. That's how I felt about them. They were like these scary little robots. And so that's why that was one of the things I was most eager to really dive into and explain to people, and to really get to the truth of, because it's something that I think is very misunderstood in general as to who and what they are, but it helps explain a lot as far as how they travel. And if you were to get a crashed craft and one of these little gray meat suits was in it, if it was inhabited by a demonic entity or AI, that could just leave that body, and all that our government would get would be an empty meat suit. They'd get nothing of any value. So it kind of makes sense as well on that front as well. They're not giving anything away. They're not putting themselves in harm's way, the entities themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, we've been talking a little bit about like atmospheric effects and everything here. So this is kind of leading to another direction for my mind, where we see talked about in Revelation that a beast is coming out of the sea. And then we also have Commander Fravor's sighting of the Tic Tac UFO, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Many of our listeners probably are as well if they're into this topic. It's definitely one of the more credible sightings, where there was something in the water. So from my memory, I don't think you said that there was much that you could recall from where you would actually go specifically, but that was one big question that was burning on my mind was, do you remember anything about like being underwater or underground? Like where exactly did you end up like going, and what do you recall about that?
Right. I was definitely subterranean, whether it was underground or underwater. I wouldn't be able to tell, and most likely not be able to tell the difference. But I was definitely being taken down. When I would be taken, often there would be these banks of what look like elevator doors, and they would take me in, and it would just go down. You can feel that going down sensation. And there were no windows, there was no natural light, that kind of thing. Everything was really this weird backlighting, and I could never see light. Another strange feature, I never saw light fixtures. All the light was some sort of indirect light, and I could never tell where it was coming from. And it was always this kind of blue, purple, or reddish backlighting. Not a lot of there are certain rooms where it was very bright, almost fluorescent, but most rooms were very dim, almost a backlighting kind of light. But it was always what seemed to be underground. And, we know so little about what's under our feet. I mean, I think the deepest that's ever been drilled was something like 8 miles, and that was just a very small, thin 8-mile down. That's not, so everything we know about underground is mostly speculation anyway, but there was a lot of admission from the powers that be and government groups and things of underground bases. And I definitely was in areas that seemed to have been carved out of like rock. There were older areas where it was a lot of stone and rock, and then there were areas where it was all just very clinical, but it was huge. I mean, the places I was taken were bigger than any stadium and airport and things like that all put together. I can't even, they don't even have any frame of reference to describe how massive these places were. And confusing, just stairwells and hallways and rooms and elevators, and just it huge. Like, it was so easy, to get lost, which So I think that would keep people from running away. Not that I could, because I was always under this UFO brain fog type of feeling when I was taken as well. But I think I'm getting ahead and digressing, so I'll stop and back up and let you see if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think a little bit. The only thing I wanted to ask was about the lighting. Is maybe would you speculate maybe it's some type of bioluminescence, or was it something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been learning more lately about bioluminescence and how sea creatures utilize that, and we're just getting down into some new depths in the ocean and that type of thing. I have no idea. I have no way to know. They never explained those things to me. Everything I saw, I can say from firsthand experience I saw, but I don't have explanations for everything I saw. So I can only speculate on how and what it was.
Okay. Isaiah, you got anything else you want to ask off of that?
Yeah, that's very fascinating with the underground structures and just the networks of rooms. I'm wondering, so I guess this is, you've been abducted and probably taken into like a different sort of dimension. Would you say these locations were under the earth? And if so, do you think we would be able to find them, or are they sort of in a maybe more spiritual dimension running in parallel to the earth?
Right. That's a great question. I think we're dealing with both. We are dealing with very physical, corporeal beings in physical places here, physically on the earth. Everyone talks about, oh, they're from Alpha Centauri or, Zeta Reticuli or whatever. And I'm like, where are you getting this information? Says who? I don't have any knowledge of ever being taken to some other planet. Not that I couldn't have been, but I don't remember anything like that. I was always here. And I knew I was here on Earth, and while I was taken up in the air, in the sky, and the sky is a great place to hide and to go back and forth. And can they go to other places and other planets? Sure, they have that ability. But when we start talking about the astral and fourth dimension and other planes, then it starts to just expand their territory even more. You think about Paul going to the second heaven, and you think about, all the biblical examples we have of that as well. There's just so much more to it than we know. We're just sitting here in our little third dimension reality thinking, most people think we're the apex predator and we're all there is. And that's just simply not the case. There are times when I was taken in an astral where my physical body wasn't taken, but mostly it was all just physically. And I was physically taken. I had the physical marks and bruises and burns and cuts to prove that. I had the physical scars that went along with it. But astral journeys are very real, and happen to people. People do it on purpose. I don't recommend that ever, and I don't understand why, but people do that on purpose. And the Bible tells us we're not supposed to mess with that for a very good reason, because we're not equipped to deal with the level of deception and the strength and the power that these entities have in those realms, because we are not of that realm. We're of this realm.
I'm going to go off the deep end here a little bit and speculate some. So there was actually a really recent discovery within the last couple of days that's been released where they did LiDAR scans under the pyramids, and there's these pillars with coils going around them and these like really deep boxes. Maybe you saw something about this, Karin, but you're talking about all this stuff, subterranean, whether it's, under the ocean or under the ground. You do see this theme of stuff being underground. I think in Zoroastrianism as well, they have a tradition of going underground and surviving some cataclysm. I could be mixing up my facts on that one. But you see this theme here. You even have the 411 connection with Dave Paulides' stuff, and the disappearances connect to the cave networks. And so you do have a lot that really does point to something being underground that we don't understand. So even the most skeptical person, I feel like you kind of have to look at all this and be like, something is going on, maybe we're off the mark slightly, but like it's something is going on for sure.
Oh yeah. They've discovered entire cities underground all over the world in almost every continent. Massive underground structures have been discovered. I think one was in India, just in a farmer's field when he was draining a field. I think it was a rice field, or I think it was India, maybe it was Russia. So I get my places mixed up too.
No worries.
But, and there are cultures all over the world that have cultural histories of ancestors going underground to hide, and there are cultural myths of underground civilizations. And like I said, what we know about what's underneath our feet is so limited and so little that we don't even explore the depths under us. We can't, and it is so difficult to get down there for us. There's more limitations to getting underground than there are to getting out into space or under the water. We're all scuba divers here, and just even to go 100 feet, that's challenging. Our bodies are not designed to withstand the changes in atmospheric pressures, whether it's underground, underwater, or in space. And then you get a human body like mine who's been taken so many times, whether it's in space, whether it's underground, whether it's exposure to radiation. And now I have this amazing plethora of physical health problems that are very difficult to explain. And now the government is expressing that they are admitting to and helping the veterans who've been in certain projects and programs who are also exposed to these things. But that doesn't help those of us who are just normal citizens who were taken against our will and exposed to these things as well. But seeing those admissions, and in my book I even have a report that was released where they go through the list of all the things that it's an early list. They're continually adding to it, but all the health problems that people who've been exposed to these things have to address. So, but yeah, underground, sorry, and that kind of veered off a little bit, but yeah, the underground is certainly something that, there's so much to it that we just don't have the information to explain, and we can't explore. We haven't explored.
Yeah, and this is one function for the pyramids too that I don't think a lot of people approach, is that that there's more of a spiritual aspect to it in some capacity of something like this even. Who else?
And what if they were even a place for people coming back underground to reacclimate to ground level?
Right. Yeah, kind of like a decompression chamber, to prevent for the bends, but for interdimensional kind of travel instead. No,
exactly.
That's a really good thought. Isaiah, do you have another question you want to shoot off?
Yeah, I guess this is a slightly different topic, but I guess I'm wondering about the sort of the legality on these abductions and what these beings are allowed to do with humans. It sounds like there's rules and specific limitations, but if you could just explain some of that.
Sure. And I've got this here. I'm going to show you. This book is called They Only Come Out at Night by my friend Vicki Joy Anderson. She is a very, very close friend of mine and was extremely helpful to me in all this, because there is so much legality when it comes to what can happen and can't happen in the spirit realm. God has set this up and it's all very, very restricted and very specific, and permissions must be given. So in order for someone to be taken, somewhere along the line, there either has to be an agreement or permission given. With that, I explain in the book where I think the permissions were given for me. And I think things like the Greada Treaty back in the days of Eisenhower kind of gave a blanket permission for the United States, which is why you heard about so many more things happening here than maybe in some other countries as they caught up. But we already know that in Germany, those permissions were likely given because they were already messing in that realm. And then everyone who came over with Project Paperclip brought that here. And then it continued on here. And then you get the Aleister Crowley and all of the things that I know you've discussed on the show. So permissions were given. And, for little children who are taken against their will and are terrified, someone is giving permission for them to be taken. Because people will ask, well, how can a loving God let this happen to a little child? Well, it's not that God is letting it happen. It's that we live in a fallen world, and a fallen human is giving that permission. Someone who has authority over that child is giving that permission. And it happens every day. Children are trafficked. I mean, they feed on the weakest of us. And even today, I was talking with my friend L.A. Marzulli, and we were talking about a new movie that's coming out for children. I probably won't. I don't want to mention the name of it, but it's a Disney movie, and the trailer says this boy's one wish just to be abducted by aliens. How do we fight that? Because they're glamorizing this horrifying thing, And the only way I could explain to a child what it really is would be to scare the pants off of that kid. I can't do that. I don't, A, you can't, and B, you don't want to. But, something, has to be done because that's terrifying. That now now little children are going to see this and they're going to get that permission. Because they're going to say, oh, I want that too.
Yeah.
And go out and ask for that. It's basically bringing CE5, which is summoning aliens, UFOs, UAPs down to a level of a child and teaching children how to summon demons and demonic entities. It's terrifying.
Yeah, and you've definitely hit on a key theme here, I think, where there's a huge principle in the occult that, whenever you're messing with it, you have to give it permission for whatever it does. It's kind of like the same theme we see with vampires, too. It has to have permission to enter. And this is just kind of like a new appearance of that in a sense. And that, somewhere, somehow, someone is giving permission. And I think you mentioned this in your book, actually, and this was a great point for me. But if these beings are so good, why are they taking children? If any, alien race from any other society came and like did that, like if we went and did that to an alien society, there'd be all these moral questions. We'd be labeled these really bad things, but yet somehow we want to label these aliens as like, oh, they're good, they're okay. It's like, it's a little sus to me.
Maybe movies like this one are coming out so they can kind of soften that a little bit. Say, oh, it's okay to take kids, yeah, and because it's not. You're right, but I do like Madison's point about the young blood transfusion because that possibly answers another reason. And the other reason is because they want to groom these children to take the story that they're feeding, the story that we're your ancestral seeders, that we are trying to save your planet. You just have to follow what we're saying to do. And it's just creating, this cult-like mentality to lead people away from the truth of the gospel, away from salvation. And, like the late Dr. Chuck Missler said, Satan's outnumbered 2-1. He's building an army. And this is how he does it, one at a time, and that's scary, especially starting with the children. What did Hitler do? Went for the youth.
Yeah. No, that is true. Anything else you want to hit from a psychological perspective, babe?
This kind of relates to that, but just being a child and having to endure that much trauma. I guess I have like 2 side points, but the body stores trauma. So I read through the list of health problems that you have, and I was just shocked. And I just felt so like I just couldn't even fathom experiencing something like that, and then continually I guess I don't want to say punished for it, but for lack of better words, experiencing the effects from it still to this day.
The dissonance too, to like have an experience like that you can't talk about and no one's gonna believe too. Like that's like I'm very sorry for you because like that's like a special kind of like place of suffering to be, especially as a kid.
It's very isolating.
Without God, there's just no way, but he'll take beauty. He'll give you beauty for ashes. Do these problems continue on today? Yes, they do. Do I have new things cropping up every day? Yes, I do. But he is so good. God is so good. And I look at the suffering of the people in the Bible, and even today of others, and I'm like, I can handle this, because with him, all glory to him. But there are those who've suffered a lot more. So I'll keep going. And thank you, though. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it.
I also had one more small point. You had mentioned that you had like a handler or a companion with you through most of your experiences or all of your experiences, and that he was really kind to you, almost protective. And I kind of thought that was interesting because when you're that terrified and everything, and you're shown small moments of kindness, you're shown the small moments of protectiveness, it almost feels like an intermittent, like positive reinforcement almost, or
Mhm.
almost like a way to calm you down.
Oh, yeah. I compare it to being in an abusive relationship.
Yeah,
Mm.
You'll see
absolutely.
someone with an abusive spouse, a man or a woman, and people will be like, why do you stay? And they're like,
Mhm.
well, he really loves me, or she really loves me, or look, he gave me this beautiful piece of jewelry, or look, she, this or that. And the little things along the way, and they, well, I'm so sorry, I really do love you. And then in the next breath, it's, psychological or physical abuse. And people are like, why do you stay? Well, it's familiar, it's comfortable,
Mhm.
And it's all you know. If it's all you know, then chances are your next partner choice is probably also going to be abusive unless you get the healing and the help for it, right? So this is, and I'm not trained in psychology. I clearly, from reading the book, you can tell I don't know anything about it. But what I have kind of learned along the way, from others about these things, and it makes sense,
Mhm.
how they're so crafty. And it's that two truths and a lie. They'll tell
Mhm.
you the two truths and sprinkle that lie in so that you'll just keep going and you'll keep believing and you'll keep working for them and working with them and sharing those lies with others, and they're very, Satan is a crafty little bugger, and it's unfortunate for us. We just have to, without God, we would not have a chance.
Absolutely.
And that plays into, I'll kind of do a quick psychology tangent here. It's intermittent reinforcement for conditioning. And
Yeah.
that's the most addictive out of all the kinds. It's why people get addicted to gambling, is because you'll get a positive reward, but not every time. You'll do it every once in a while. And so even though you're not always getting that positive reward, you'll still get that, oh, hey, like maybe next time, maybe next time, maybe next time. And that plays into like the Stockholm syndrome, I think, a bit
Yes.
here as well, and everything as well.
It affects your dopamine reward system in your brain, your pathway. So that's what it
Oh,
affects.
Yeah.
that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for, it's interesting because I did not realize when I wrote the book that so many other people had the same experiences that I did. But since then, so many people have come forward and said, I had a person like that too, who was with me all the time, and mine, blah, 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 and I was shocked by the number of people who had gone through the same experiences, or the number of people who would write me and say, I just read my life story.
Wow.
I feel like I'm not alone anymore. So, as for some people are like, I don't know if I can believe this. I'm like, that's okay, because you know what? There are a lot of people out there reading this who are like, oh, I lived it too. And if you can get through this, I can get through this. Because for some people, they don't recover. They don't recover well. They don't recover from this. They end up homeless. They end up hurting themselves or others because of the trauma of it. So to give people hope that you can get through this trauma and come out on the other end and do something, God will do something good with it. That's amazing. So, I'm not worried about the people who don't believe. I'm worried about the people who need the help more than anything else.
That's a good approach. All right, Isaiah, we haven't heard from you in a while. What do you got for us?
Well, you touched on the fact that in society in general, there's a lot of information on this, but there's a lot of it's negative, or a lot of it tries to spin it so it seems like a good thing, and these aliens like a positive thing, and I feel like that's very common. I just want to thank you for kind of being a voice of truth amongst all that, because and just sharing that there's a higher power. With God we have that's really where the love and the goodness comes from. But there's a lot of deception and just such a spiritual war. But then I had a question. So with the abductions, is there a possibility that someone might be abducted and then not have memory of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think it happens so much more often than anyone realizes. Like I said, I think for myself and for others, those of us who were able to disassociate, when I was doing that, they weren't getting, a lot of interaction from me. So they weren't blocking me so much. They weren't giving me the, in the Men in Black, when they hold the little pin up. Well, that's a kind of a good representation of what they do. They just kind of try to wipe it, or they'll give you a false memory. You dreamed about going on vacation, or you dreamed about this or that. Um, and so, if you're really there, and reacting, they're going to have to just deal with you. But if you're not reacting, they're not dealing with you. And I think for me and for others that I've talked about, other people I've talked to who have more clear memories like I do, and I don't remember everything. I don't have clear memories of everything. And a lot of the memories I don't allow to come to the surface because I just don't want to remember them. They're just too traumatic. So when it starts to come to the surface, I'm like, nope, I don't need, there's no need for me to remember everything, especially all the trauma. If God's going to allow me to just leave it back there, I'm going to leave it back there. But for those of us who do remember, the one thing we have in common is that we created a part of us that lived that and a part of us that didn't. And I think that is why we have the memories, because we just disassociated so much from it. And then when we kind of came back together as adults, meaning allowed ourselves to reunite with that second person we created in ourselves, without sounding like I have multiple personalities, because I didn't. It's the same person. I just was able to separate. Then all those memories just joined together. So they were always there. It's not like I was two different people. It's just that I could ignore that part. So yeah, I do think there are people who've been taken that have no memory and probably never will. And I think that's the way God protects us as well, honestly, in a weird kind of way.
Yeah, that definitely feeds into like the CPTSD, the complex trauma there, where that's the precursor to, and it's actually in the DSM-5 dissociative identity disorder of having multiple different personalities, where you'll have like your child that's trying to be protected, and that's always present, and you'll usually have like a protector of that child, and then there's some other fragment archetypes as well. And so these definitely certainly exist, and it's a way to cope, to kind of like to split off the good and the bad so that you can survive. So no, that's a very good question. And it feeds into, because we went to the Mothman Festival about 6 months ago, and we talked with Linda Sigmund, who was a Mothman. She had an experience with Mothman, and she didn't have any memory of the experience at all until talking with a psychologist. I think she said that she was regressed. But this leads me to a very interesting question that I actually had, because we've had we've talked to Linda Sigmund, out in the field, and then we talked to Dave Spinks, who's a paranormal investigator, and they approach it from these entities are friendly, they're not harmful, they mean us good. You have a very different approach here. And I think it's good to hear both sides of the argument. But why don't you expand a little bit for us on why there are some dangers here and why you believe that?
Yeah, and I'm always open to listening to anyone's opinions and thoughts and experiences, and I don't expect everyone to believe the way I do. But the reason that I feel that these entities are evil or bad, for a couple of reasons. If you are speaking in front of a group and you say, who thinks it's okay to abduct a 5-year-old child against their will from their bedroom at night? No one's hand is going to go up. That's not okay. What about taking an innocent cow out of a field and draining all of its blood and coring out its organs? Is that benevolent behavior? Things like, stopping someone's car on the side of the road and, and taking them out of their vehicle and physically assaulting them, sexually assaulting them, is that benevolent behavior? Things like that. And those are certainly things I cannot say are good. And even the people I've spoken with who say, well, I've had great experiences, they've enlightened me, they've this. When they tell me their experiences, there's always this horrible part of it. There's always some very negative things happening. Yeah, I got really badly beaten up, or this happened or that happened, but I was so enlightened. And so there's always a but in there, So it's again, we're back to the two truths and a lie, where they're giving them something good and get, like you said, the dopamine level up, and then the bad stuff is happening in there too. So what I do know is that we are warned biblically that Satan will come as an angel of light, and his ambassadors will as well. And these entities could show up, in the middle of the street, if there's a car accident and someone gets hit, and they could offer that person healing and come in dressed in white and glowing and beautiful and appealing and say, I am your savior. I'm here to help you all, come with me. And they're doing these beautiful, wonderful things. people are going to eat that up. Of course, that looks lovely and wonderful. You can't tell just by a few actions or by how something looks or what it does with you in that one occasion, whether it's good or evil. You have to test the spirits. And, it's like a carjacker doesn't walk around with a t-shirt on that says, hey, I'm a carjacker, or a pedophile walk around with a t-shirt that says, hey, I'm a pedophile. No, they come in like your best friend or a nice guy or a school teacher or a pastor or anything like that. They're going to come in as who you think you can trust the most. And then they're going to deceive you. So, it's just so difficult, for people who don't understand the gospel and don't understand how to test the spirits, because they're going to be easily deceived, and that's unfortunate. So on that, in that respect, I can understand that. I grew up in that area. I grew up in that Southern Ohio area. I grew up right there in that Mothman area. I grew up around the Serpent Mound, playing in those areas, around those things, around all that high strangeness. I'm very familiar with all that, and there are a lot of people there who just think that's the greatest thing ever. But there's a lot of dangers there too, and there's a reason we're told to be careful around that. We are not equipped to deal with these entities from these multidimensional entities. They've been around a lot longer than we are. They've got abilities we don't understand, strengths we don't understand. We're dealing with future physics, things we can't control in our physical universe. So it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Looking at it both from the complex PTSD standard of disassociating, I think you drew a great parallel there to, they're focusing more on the good and not the bad that came with it. But also, I think that we do have to be careful, because if we as people can deceive other people, how much more can these higher up entities, deceive? You brought up another great point, because when I was reading your book, that jumped out to me that you were near Serpent Mound, because we had actually been to Serpent Mound and talked about it, and I think it's a really cool feat of engineering. From an engineering perspective, to be able to our roads can't last for more than a decade, it seems, but they built something at least 1,000 years old by conservative estimates.
Yeah.
At one point on the show, we had speculated that maybe it wasn't a serpent at all, but maybe it was like a UFO, and that the egg in the serpent's mouth is actually like that Tic Tac UFO, and that the Serpentine Trail is telling a story of where it flew, or a map or something. But what are your thoughts? 'Cause I wanted to hear what your take was, because you have a very unique lens of looking at places like Serpent Mound.
Yeah, I think I love your take on that, and I think that is certainly possible. I think these things are designed to have multi-faceted explanations, because biblically, we see a serpent and we see a seed and we see an egg, as and there's so many multifaceted descriptions and explanations for it. I think I love that description that you gave. I think that's very possible, and I think it can have multiple, like I said, multiple descriptions and multiple things that it can be depicting. I do think that it harkens back to Genesis 3:15, because I really believe everything kind of comes back to to the seed war, in the garden, when the fall of man, when we're first deceived, then you get the pre-incarnate Jesus there, and God saying, and the seed of the woman will be enmity with the seed of the serpent, and you will bruise his heel and he will crush your head. And this is the serpent swallowing the seed, trying to invade the seed of man. They've been trying since that point in time to dilute mankind, to dilute the seed. You get to the days of Noah with that everything was corrupt everywhere, every living thing at that point, and that's why God chose that form of judgment on the world and made the changes that he did and brought rain to the world and all of those things. And that's a whole nother conversation. So, and I know you've had a lot of those conversations on your show, so I won't go down that path. But so I think, it all goes back to the seed war. And isn't it interesting that the Tic Tac UFO is shaped like a seed? And isn't it interesting that the serpent is shaped like what could be a dimensional pathway? And then, you've got all the spirals going different directions, and you've got just so many things that could be utilized to identify modes of travel and different interdimensional travel. And it all harkens back, though, I think, to the seed war and to the Bible. And that's what I think that represents.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And those are some great parallels there, especially,
Mhm,
looking back to that mythology lens and that biblical history lens that we like to take on the
mhm.
show. Isaiah, what do you got? I know you got a ton of burning questions on your mind.
Well, I guess I've got sort of a broad question. What do you think would be the biggest misunderstanding about this whole topic? I guess, yeah.
Mhm. That's a great question. I think the really biggest misunderstanding in popular culture today is that these are spacemen from another planet.
Hmm.
And, I do not believe that. I believe that these are the angelic beings.
Hmm.
It's a misnomer to call them angels, as you all know very well. But, but I'll use that as, the angels were a created race of beings created to serve God before us. We don't know much about them because we don't have a book about them. We have a book about us and our salvation, not about them. So, but that I think is the biggest hurdle, that and the biggest misconception is that these are just spacemen from another planet and our ancestral seeders. They're not. They're another race of beings created by God. And some of them have fallen and some of them have sinned. And those are the ones that are trying to, since have to, fallen, what, a third of them fell in league with Satan since the Garden of Eden. I've been trying to mess with the bloodline, tried to keep Jesus from being born, tried to kill him, tried to,
Hmm.
they're just trying to mess with us to take our birthright. They want this planet back. They were here before us. They left behind a lot of big structures and a lot of reminders that they were here once. And I think they want it back.
Yeah, that was a good question.
I
What?
guess
Anything
Mhm.
else?
kind of a very different question. What was your sense on sort of the level of intelligence of these beings, like compared to humans? Did they seem much more intelligent or similar?
Yeah, much more intelligent,
Wow.
highly intelligent, and deceptive too. I
Hmm.
mean, just they're just, it's like when we're dealing with little kids, you can easily trick a little child into doing what you want them
Yeah.
to do, and I'm not saying that's right, but that's how it felt. They're just so far advanced of us. And you can take a little kid and say, got your nose, and they think you have their nose. That's kind of what it's like. We don't understand their abilities, their future physics, you know, the realm that they're in. So it's just so easy to, yeah, they're very intelligent.
Yeah. So that actually leads me into one of my questions I had here. And maybe you hit on some of this in the book, but it's a little hazy for me on every detail. Did you see any other creatures besides like grays and reptiles? Did you see anything that might resemble like cherubim or like serpentine kind of creatures? Because we see these
Mhm.
alluded to both in Mesopotamian mythology and in the Bible, in Ezekiel, in Genesis, and Revelation, dragon-like creatures. Is there anything
Mhm.
that you experienced that might kind of align with these descriptions?
Yeah, there were so many different types, and I kind of um, group them into like the insectoid type and the grays and the Nordics and then the reptilian, but they all kind of crossed over as well. So, like, I cannot look at hammerhead sharks because there's an entity that looked kind of like that.
Hmm.
Where do you classify that one, right? More of an insectoid, but still it kind of looked like a hammerhead shark.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so there are so many different, and some were just, yeah, very small and squatish, and they didn't, they're just so different. Um, yes, I guess to answer your question, there were just so many different kinds and types. Um, and I can't even remember how many. I couldn't even classify if I had to. That's why I kind of keep it in those four general categories, because some looked more like a cross between an insect and a reptile. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Almost like we have so many different animals and creatures and insects on our planet. And sometimes I'll see one or a weird little insect and I'll just be like, ugh, because there's a large version of that I've seen that was intelligent.
Hmm.
So yeah, I wish I was an artist so I could draw all of these different things that I've seen because it's just wild beyond anything I could explain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that definitely gives some credence to how much diversity you see in like spiritual entities and like pagan myths across the world. I think, is to look at that and be like, oh, look at all these, like the South Americans have their legends of the ant people. And then, you have, all these different entities describe the Mesopotamian and biblical stories
Mhm.
of like these lions with wings, cherubim, serpents,
Right.
dragons. So yeah, no, it all kind of starts to align a bit, I think.
And then I had to wonder, are they doing then what they did in the days of Noah? Are they trying to cross animal genes with their genes, and are they trying to create these hybrid creatures again? Because were all of them their creatures, or were some of them possibly hybrids? And these are things I don't know,
Hmm.
because I didn't communicate or get close to everything. I was very restricted in my communications and what I was close to or whom I was close to. So some of them could easily have been some sort of a hybrid experiment, because there were things with what looked like horns with eyes, or just it just didn't make sense. Like I said,
Hmm.
like the things with the heads that look like a hammerhead shark because the eyes were on the ends. Y- where do you classify that? I mean, I don't know.
Right. Question about the technology that they had. I mean, because everyone's of course familiar with like the UFOs and whatnot. Did it have like a modern style to it? Like all the technology you came across, was it very clinical, or did it have more of like a maybe kind of like a what's the word for it? Like a blend of ancient and modern, like kind of like ancient Atlantean, ancient Mesopotamian kind of like look, but like a modern vibe to
Mhm.
it.
I didn't notice anything too ancient Mesopotamian. What I was exposed to was all very beyond anything I could even conceive of at my, especially at
Mm.
younger ages, because everything was very either like touch screen, but you couldn't even see the screens, or machinery that things would come out of and do stuff very automated. And I didn't know what those machines were for or what they did, but they would just be like flat panels.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden stuff would come out, or lights would
Mhm.
come on, or all of a sudden there would be a screen there where there was nothing. And they would take me and others, because there were times I was with others, and we would go into a room, and the whole room was like a screen, like a movie screen. And it would just be, they would show us like movies of things like natural disaster type movies and stuff like that, saying we're here to keep this from happening. Propaganda, 100%. But back then, I couldn't imagine a whole room being screened, so I felt like I was in it. I thought they
Mm.
were showing me the future. And again, anything not distinguishable, anything you can't understand, magic, right? And
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's they were so advanced. What today we would be able to do with a set of VR goggles, back then, to me, just was so mind blowing. But
Mm.
I look back on the things that happen now, and I'm like, oh, we're catching up with some of those things. You could go into an immersive room full of screens and feel like you were somewhere. You could put on VR goggles and feel like all these things were actually happening when they weren't really there. So, things have definitely caught up, but that's kind of, it didn't seem ancient in any way to me or anything like that. Like you see those pictures of the petroglyphs of machines with all these levers and things. I didn't see anything like that.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just wasn't where I was.
Yeah, so more futuristic than anything else, not really any lingerings of any kind of ancient technology. I had to ask the question, we got to
No, that's
speculate
a
on it.
great question. Yeah, yeah. If it was somewhere, it wasn't where I was taken.
Okay. Isaiah,
Maybe
what?
there's a room full of that. I don't know.
Yeah, with the technology, you may have alluded to this maybe in your book or in previous conversations, but I was wondering, I've heard of the idea that in Germany, in World War II, the Nazis may have been at least trying to contact spirits. And of course, they had extremely advanced technology. They were ahead of just about everyone else. Do you have any ideas on that conversation?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's where Project Paperclip comes in, because as they were going through those files of the during that time of the Nazis, when they would see a scientist or someone who could be useful, they would paperclip that file. That's where Project Paperclip comes from. And then they would give that person basically a new identity and bring them into the country as, John Smith or whoever, and bring them into the space program. And that's how we got our space program. That's how we got all of these things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe that they were working with them, and that all that really happened at the end of World War II is it just transferred here.
Mm-hmm.
So it just continued on, because they made leaps of technological leaps that, how? Okay,
Yeah.
And then that came here. I mean, you look at how far we've come in the last 150 years. You go from nothing to going, to this. I mean, it's crazy. We didn't do that on our own. But it's an old story. There's nothing new under the sun. It's an old story just happening again and again. We're given technology in exchange for something. For what? Well, they get to take us. They get to take people. Those agreements are being made. They were made way back in the days. We have that in the biblical. We have it in other ancient texts, and it's happening still today, I believe.
Yeah, and you definitely have a lot of the occult coming over with the Nazis, because the Nazis were huge into that. That was a huge part of Hitler's motif. I mean, like I think the Nazi symbol itself is actually occult in origin, like the swastika. I'll have to double check that though.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I had a question for you, because we just recently been talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and when you look at the Sumerian kings list, Gilgamesh is referenced as being fathered by some translations will say an invisible being, but when you really dig into the Mesopotamian text, it's a Lilu spirit, so like a male incubus spirit almost. So I was curious. This kind of seems a little bit, I don't want to say contradictory, but multi-dimensional to the Nephilim or disembodied spirits. Where I still come at it from that perspective, of course. But I was just curious. Did you see any indications that these more demonic entities like directly could breed? Would you agree or disagree with that translation? Do you think we've misunderstood what's meant by spirit in this context? What's your experience, and what light do you have to shed on that?
Yeah, I think there are some misinterpretations as far as interpreting the ancient text to current modern day text in some instances. I do think that what we saw were the fallen ones, the angelic beings, breeding with humans, which was not supposed to be allowed, but did. And so I think sometimes they would be referred to as a spirit realm only because they were interdimensional. So, that translation, whatever word it was translated from, could have just meant that they were interdimensional. They were coming in and out of realms. Because when you talk about a disembodied spirit, then that's something else. And so I think that, a Nephilim is clearly a cross between the two species. When you get to Gilgamesh, I don't know if you've heard of Justin Brown. He's a friend of mine. He just recently came out with a book called The Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, he has a really interesting take on it, where he's done some comparative analysis to that with Esau. He's calling it the Epic of Esau. Sorry.
Okay.
But he's comparing Esau and Esau's journey with Gilgamesh. And he's also comparing that there might have been some Nephilim breeding in there that created a Nephilim. And he's got some really interesting insights. I'll have to put you in touch with him, because it's a really interesting conversation to have with him. But there's so much more to it. So but I never had, until I talked to him about it, I'd never taken Esau and Gilgamesh and compared the two. But there's some very strong comparisons in those two stories. So it's interesting. I do think, yes, that there was some interbreeding there, and I do think that it's possible that Gilgamesh and Esau were Nephilim.
That's some good insights there. Thank you for that. Isaiah, what else do you got?
Oh, well, I guess to stay on the topic of mythology, I had this idea that, well, in the past, in all these different cultures and civilizations, we have lots of stories, and a lot of them have their own pantheons. I'm wondering if you've ever thought about the idea that there could have been more encounters like this in the past per person, if the global population was far lower, maybe a higher ratio of these spiritual beings to humans.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. it's so hard to say how many people have had experiences
Mhm.
because we just don't know. And A, people don't remember. B, people don't want to come forward because of the stigma associated.
Yeah.
I think it could be higher than we even realize as it is. So, and global population wise, who knows how many of our population is actually human?
Mhm.
And not to get too woo on everybody, but there are modern day Nephilim. You look at the books by Dr. David Jacobs. He has a book called Walking Among Us. Fascinating. And I think there really is something to that. And it goes back to, Satan's outnumbered 2-1, late Dr. Chuck Missler. He's building an army, and that's another part of it. So that's a great question. I think there's more interaction than we have any idea of.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the wolves in sheep's clothing quote.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What else you got, Isaiah? I'll kick the floor to you for a couple more
I
questions
guess kind
before
of
we finish up.
a different question. Do you think, it sounds like there's probably hierarchies with these beings. Did you notice any of that? Like when you were with your experiences, were there clear distinctions between different levels of authority and maybe intelligence?
Definitely. Yeah, there were. And, they never sat me down and said, here's our org chart or anything. But there were certain types that looked insectoline, and I called them the corner sitters when I was little, because they'd always be off in a corner watching and kind of crouching in a corner. They had really long arms and legs that bent what looked like the wrong way. And they would be off in that corner or off watching everyone, and they were clearly in charge. Clearly. And I could tell other entities were very reverent of them or afraid of them or respectful, if that's the right word. I don't like to use that word about them, but of them, there were clearly hierarchies. There were clearly more intelligent entities. There were clearly some that were dictating what was happening and who was in charge, or who was doing what. So yeah, that was clearly the case.
Yeah, I guess, and then kind of jumping all over the place here, but back to Germany. We briefly talked about the Nazis and that era, but I know if you go back several hundred years, there were a lot of stories. A lot of our fairy tales come from that part of the world, Germany, and just the whole idea of fairies and those types of beings. Of course, we're on this whole topic. I'm sure there's experiences people have had in actual events. I don't think most of this stuff was made up. So I don't know if you've done any research on that or not.
I think there's so much to Europe and to the European culture and land that, and even here, if you look at the Native Americans and the Americans who were here then and before then, we're given such a limited scope of our actual American history. So I won't go down that road because it can get political, and I don't want to do that. But so much is hidden from us, deliberately obfuscated from us. And you look at Europe, there's just so much culture and history and so much of the rich history of their cultural myths and things that are handed down that come from truth, and that, so much that goes back to the underground and the peoples that lived underground, or the little people and the fairies. And then there's still people today who say they have encounters with little people here in the US, and all of this, and the one thing too, going back to, you asked me what's one of the biggest misconceptions culturally. Another one of the biggest misconceptions is this knows no cultural boundaries. Abduction and these alien, non-human alien entities, every continent, every culture, every country, every language, every race, every creed has experiences with these. It knows no boundaries, no cultural boundaries, no physical boundaries. It affects everyone. Because I'll hear people say, well, why does it always seem to be in the US? Well, that's what you're hearing about, because there's maybe more of an ease of sharing that information here. But it's worldwide, culture-wide. It's everywhere. It really has no boundaries.
I will interject real quick. We are firm believers in at least I'm a firm believer in a giant bone cover up by the Smithsonian. So that you can certainly mention that. I feel like that's probably some of where you were wanting to go.
Oh yeah. When I grew up in Central Ohio, we grew up around what was called at the time Mound City, and now it's called the Hopewell Earthworks something. I don't know, they keep changing it. And my parents were, avid in trying to get the bones and things back that the Smithsonian came and took, because they would tell us, they took the giant bones from all these mounds, and not just the Smithsonian, but the British Museum as well. So when I first took my parents to the British Museum, they were thrilled because they thought maybe we could get down in the basement and find our stuff. I'm like, I don't think they'll let us do that, but I would love to. And of course they're never going to give those things back. But it was, everyone knew. So growing up, it wasn't a myth. It was just something we all knew happened. So I'm not sure at what point it became a myth, because even for us growing up, it was just those bones were, everyone knew about the giant bones. And it wasn't just where I grew up, it was all over the country. And that their thing was just, if you discovered them, don't say anything, because they're going to come and take them. So, and this is another reason you need to talk to my friend Ellie Marzulli. He's the expert in that as well. And I have a girlfriend who's an archaeologist, and she and I are determined we're going to go find ourselves a giant skeleton one of these days. So, be on the lookout. I'll let you know when we do.
Yes, absolutely. I'll have you back on to talk about your finding. Well, I'll ask you one more question. I'll have Isaiah ask you one more, and then we'll wrap up here. So I as we were talking here, I was kind of curious because, Mothman resembles a lot of the gray aliens, especially from Linda Sigmund's description. So I was curious, in all of your time, did you see anything that would resemble like stuff that you might see in pop culture as being like a cryptid, like, Bigfoot, Mothman, anything like that? Did you, and was that a regular occurrence then, or?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I can't say that I saw a Bigfoot or anything, but like I was saying before, a lot of them, I was like, are these crosses? I didn't know what, I didn't have the right vocabulary for it back then, but I wondered, is this a cross between an animal and one of them, or what? Because some of them just looked so weird. So absolutely, cryptid at the time wasn't in my vocabulary like it is now, but yeah, there were definitely things that could have been cryptids. And I do believe that that's what they are. I mean, everyone has different thoughts and feelings on it. My thoughts, they're just modern day Nephilim, or a type of Nephilim, or a type of fallen angelic being. It's hard to tell which is which, but and if we could get up close and ask them, I'm not sure we would get an answer. And I know we don't want to get close to them, but yeah, it's hard to tell which is which, but I'm sure that that's what they are, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, Isaiah, last question. Make it good.
How do these entities view Jesus?
As their Lord, Savior, Creator, and they are terrified of him. And that's how I was able to get out of it, because once I'm like, wait a minute, you have the same Creator I do. The look of terror and fear, especially in my handler's eyes. Wow. He's like, she knows, shoot. Because I had already been saved at one point and I fell away. But even when I was saved, nobody explained to me who these entities were. So I didn't think they had anything to do with God in the Bible.
Yeah.
I didn't put that together. No one explained to me about the parts of the Bible I didn't understand. And I wasn't reading my Bible like that. And I just wanted to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and leave the Old Testament alone. And I didn't realize that there's so much to it. And then I didn't realize that there were books that were deliberately taken out, not because they shouldn't be part of canon, but because someone decided they didn't want them in there, or that there was a group of people who decided, let's put it in this order. I believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God, but I also believe that there are books that shouldn't have been taken out. So yeah, they're terrified. And you can think the name of Jesus, you can feel it, you can say it. It doesn't matter. The second you say it, they're gone. They're Splitsville. They cannot handle it. And the reason it doesn't work for some people is the same reason there are spots in the Bible that explain this too. Because there are people who know what it is, know who Jesus is, know how it works, but they don't believe, they're counterfeit. They're using it counterfeit. And so that's the reason. You could have someone who is not saved, who does not really believe in the Bible, but who has heard about Jesus and knows about it and doesn't realize in their heart how much they do know. And they'll say the name of Jesus and these things will flee because they know. It's really God. Only God knows your heart, and they know it too. And so it's such a complex subject. Sometimes when people ask, well, why doesn't it always work? I'm like, well, how do you know? Who have you talked to that it didn't work for?
Yeah.
And then let's talk to that person and find out. A lot of times it's because that person is not really a part of God's kingdom.
Mm.
You know,
It's like the people
or
trying to
there's
cast
something else
out demons
going
that
on.
didn't have the
Yeah,
authority. Yeah.
exactly. So, there are reasons for that. Or they didn't call on Jesus. They said they did, but they didn't. Or other reasons. So there can be a lot of different reasons behind that. But yes, they know who he is. And that's the reason that they can't take me today. Not for lack of trying. Trust me, they've tried. And they've tried all kinds of ways to deceptively get back into my life. My handler came back to me at one point and was like, I am dying. I need you to help me to be a part, of this, without you on. And he looked terrible. He looked like he was dying. He was just, and I was like, I didn't even hesitate. I was just like, no, in Jesus' name, no, and as soon as Jesus' name comes off of your lips or out of your head or, thinking it, it's over.
Wow.
You're gone. That's it. It's just that quick. It's just that quick. They know the truth. They know the Bible better than we know the Bible. They know God's truth and word better than we know it. That's where the deception can come in, though.
Yeah.
They can come in and quote all kinds of Bible quotes to you and tell you that they are your benevolent seer. So, that's where you have to be careful.
Well, Karin, any final thoughts you want to leave us with? Thank you so much for coming on. Again, her book will be in the show notes for the listeners. But Karin, final thoughts. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my final thoughts are, don't go looking up for them, for UFOs and aliens, and look up for him. Look up for Jesus. There really is only one path to light, to salvation, to truth, to love. Everything else is just a counterfeit. And if you want to get in touch with me, just go through my website and send me an email. It's very hard to get a hold of me through social media. I have so many messages in there. It's impossible to get through them. So please excuse me if you try that way and you don't hear from me. It's not personal. Just send me an email. It's the easiest way. And I haven't been on my social media as much lately, dealing with a lot of health crisis issues right now. So I'm hoping to try to get back into it slowly. The next couple of months are going to be a little up and down and iffy. So I'm grateful that I was able to have this time with y'all and finally get this scheduled and do this. But, please reach out to me. Please send me an email if you have any questions, comments, thoughts. The book is available at lamarzulli.com. Just don't be afraid of these things. Don't be afraid of these things because Jesus has all authority. And I appreciate you guys and what you're doing. It is so amazing and so important. Please keep doing this. You are just shedding so much light and truth on so many things, and it's so important. So thank you for what you guys are doing with Josiah Madison and Isaiah. Sorry, Isaiah. You guys are great guests today. I really enjoyed it. And I hope we can talk about this more. If you ever want to talk about UFOs and all this more, please let me know. I'm happy to come back and talk again.
Yeah, we'll definitely be setting up another interview in the future. I think this has been a great conversation, shedding a lot of light on everything. So, thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for my voice again, people. It's definitely been a difficult voice day for me, but we made it through. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, I think that interview went pretty well. What do you guys think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of deep insights, a lot of profound insights. I'm not really going to focus so much on a recap. I think we just went too many tangential directions. So sorry, user 123, we did not follow your rule here. But when you have a guest on like that, you definitely just want to follow where the conversation leads.
Yeah.
And my neurodivergent brain likes to just sometimes go down rabbit holes. So. Anything that you had, Isaiah, that you wanted to kind of leave the listeners with?
I don't know. I think there's plenty that they're that will fill their mind after that conversation. So.
Yeah.
I agree. Hey, and don't hesitate to, like, I'll say this again in a minute, but don't hesitate to email into the show with thoughts or comments. And you can also email Karin or reach out to Karin because she pushed that as well. But yeah, again, I highly encourage you that if this sparked any kind of interest, go support Karin, go buy the book, just to hear her side of it. A lot of what was in the book, I was reading it and I'm like, man, this is like hardcore MQuad style right here. It's like a lot, not maybe every detail, but the majority of it definitely aligned with the MQuad direction and the conclusions we've come to on this show. And that was something that resonated with me very deeply. So, yeah, email us your, wait, before I do that, you guys have anything else?
I just wanted to say that I think the interview will open up maybe new perspectives or, just new topics to look into, like with the blood types and the transfusions. Like that was something new for me that I didn't really make that connection until I read her book and talked to her about it. So I think that's listening to this is going to be really beneficial for some people.
Yeah.
And lead them into new discoveries.
And I want to look at the mysteries of the present and combine it with the history of the past and the mythology of the past. And this is kind of the crux of the show, is to merge all of these together and see what direction it leads.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you can certainly just ride along for the mythology if that's your speed, nothing wrong with that. But, hey, for those of you that stuck it out and wanted to explore the deeper things, we appreciate you for sticking around and being the true loyal fans to the MQuad seeking of truth.
We appreciate you.
Yes. All right. So we ask that you share the podcast with someone. If you know someone that might enjoy the show, please take a minute to share it with them. That helps us gain some traction. If you want to support the show, you can do us buy us a cup of coffee. In reality, it's a book. It kind of helps keep the lights on for the show, helps fund the research, helps fund everything. If you do a donation of $25 or more, you'll get mentioned as a producer for the subsequent show or whenever I see it. Social media platforms, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube handle. Almost all of that's m.quad.musings, or search Musings on Mysteries and Mythical Matrix. We will come up inevitably. You can also email us m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Please reach out to us. Send us your confessions, concessions, contentions, snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show. We want to hear from you. So whether you've been listening on the earth with the mortals, in the stars of the heavens with Enoch and the cherubim, or
down in Sheol,
we thank you for quantumly transcending time to join us for this epic mystery discovery for this episode. And we hope you have a good rest of your night.
I like the music.